She's the pushy broad from the Bronx, New York. Follow her voice, her straight talk is nice. She's a pushy broad from the Bronx, oh yeah. Don't be surprised if you wanna listen twice. Make decisions, find the right choice. Know yourself better, find your own voice. It's okay if you need help today, cause everybody needs a little push. From the pushy broad from the Bronx, New York.
Welcome, Transformation Talk Radio listeners. My name is Ellen Stewart, and I am the Pushy Broad from the Bronx. I am thrilled to introduce you to my new show, Women Who Push for More. It's in its 7th week right now, and we've had some amazing women come forward to tell us their empowering and inspiring stories. I have a young lady today who has an amazing story to tell. And the moment she wrote me expressing her interest in appearing on my show, I knew that I had to reach out to her and have this conversation. I'd like to introduce to you Tanin Kayvan. She is a full-time adventurer, photographer, and environmental advocate for Indigenous communities around the globe. Let's have a conversation with Tanin. Hi there, how are you?
Thank you so much for having me. How are you, Ellen?
I'm very good, thank you. So I was very attracted to the words that you had to say, and I want you to give us an idea of how all of this started. So talk to me about what it was like for you growing up and what interest you had in traveling the world.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I'll start with a story for you. So we had a TV at our house, but we couldn't watch, like there was no channels on it. So we could watch movies, but that was about it. And then one day, someone knocked on our door with a big box of nature documentaries in VHS and everything. They were from National Geographic, the life documentaries, all sorts of documentaries on different Indigenous communities, animals. And so instead of watching kids shows, I just grew up watching all of these documentaries. And it became part of who I am today. It's just ingrained in me. And
That's
really
amazing. How old were you when that happened? It was like a miracle. Like somebody came by. I guess we would think of it as Santa Claus came by and just gave you some kind of a gift all of a sudden. How old were you when you started watching those?
I think I was like 4.
Wow.
Yeah, I think it was one of our neighbors was moving out, and he had all these movies that he just didn't want anymore. And so he gave them to us, and it fueled so much that has become my life.
Do you recall a favorite documentary, a favorite part of the world that you focused on?
I had a documentary on literally, from continent, like every continent. I was watching documentaries from really all over the world, and I couldn't pick one. I just remember loving all of them and feeling like I wanted to do the same thing one day. So
it's very influential, there's no question. So here you are, 4 years old, and then where did it take you? Move on from there. School, what happened in school and how you felt about this?
So I went through school, and then my passion for nature and all things travel just grew stronger and stronger. What I would actually do is I remember outside of one of my schools, there was this dumpster, and inside of it, there wasn't any garbage, but there was all these magazines that they were going to throw out. And they were also nature magazines. So I actually went and I took a bunch of these magazines, ripped out all the pages, and plastered them all over my walls. So you walk into my room and there's just all these pictures. And I actually never thought of becoming a photographer. I just knew I wanted to explore the world I was in. And so I went through school and I wasn't too sure if I wanted to go to university, and I ended up going for a couple years, and then I was studying anthropology. And and in school we were reading about all these different tribal communities, but I felt like I think there's a difference between knowing something, Ellen, and really understanding it. I feel like when we experience something, through our five senses, that becomes an understanding. But, I was reading these books and I didn't feel like I was really learning or making the kind of difference that I knew I would want to make. So I decided to actually start traveling to these communities on my own. And
How 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 young were you when you decided to travel to these communities?
so I was 20. I was 20 when I decided I wanted to do it, but I started at 21, I think. So at 20, I left university and I started working and saving up to go on these trips. And then at 21 is when I started. And then before that, I had done a little bit of travel. I didn't grow up in a family that traveled. When I was 18, I left the country really for the first time. I used to go on trips to the US as a kid, but I had never really gone outside of North America. So when I was 18, I traveled to India to visit some relatives there. And then when I turned 19, I had started university and I was going to study abroad in Australia. And on my way to Australia, I decided to go to New Zealand and Japan. So Japan was actually my first official solo trip. And that was really, really cool because it was, my first time wanting to, do something like that. And I finally got to do it.
So here you are, right? You mentioned to me that your family lived in Canada. I know you mentioned that from before. So you were not all that well traveled in at all, and then you started to travel a little bit in the Northeast. Then you got this big break and you wanted to go abroad. And here you are, you said what, 19 with your first solo trip to
Yeah.
Japan. Yes? That's an amazing thing. You didn't go with a group of friends, right? You just went by yourself?
Yeah, I did.
And
Um,
you were always okay with that, going by yourself?
that actually reminds me of a story I have for you. So, you know, Ellen, you tell me, have you ever at some point heard from, your family or maybe even the media that the world is a dangerous place and that you should be scared of it?
Of course. Parents don't want you to go where they can't protect you. So
Exactly.
that's a
So,
common thing.
so growing up, it was always this thing of like, you're not going to travel, like, you're not doing that. There was never any encouragement about me traveling. And so when I was 19, I had a lot of fears, a lot of anxieties about traveling on my own because I, grew up hearing that the world is this big, bad, scary place that you should be scared. You should be scared of. And so I was in Australia that after Japan and New Zealand, I was in Australia and I still had my travel fears. And I went on a little trip to a place called Byron Bay. I'm not sure if you've heard of it, but for anyone who is familiar with Byron Bay, it is home of the commercial hippie. So when I was in Byron Bay, I was still, I was 19 at that time. And I was feeling really lost. I was feeling really fearful because I wanted to travel more. I was planning a trip to Argentina, but I just felt like there was a lot of fear holding me back. And so I decided to go do what every 19-year-old does when they feel lost and fearful. I decided to go see a psychic. So, so I went. I went to see a psychic, and it was really cool. I walked into the building and I get a nice waft of incense, and there's the prayer flags, um and I see the woman there. And then I remembered something. I remember my sister telling me before that she had gone to see psychics and that they're not really reliable sources of information. And and then I was like, "Oh no, like, well, how do I make sure that this is a reliable source of information?" So I look at the woman and I'm like, "Excuse me. So how long have you been doing this for?" She definitely did not look happy. She did not look happy, but she was like, 35 years. I've been doing this for 35 years. And I was like, oh, okay, like reliable source of information. So I went to see her, and, she actually gave me a really accurate reading of how I was feeling at the time. And so basically what happened is I just trusted that as I go through the process, I would become less and less scared. And I was really determined to prove myself right, because I felt like there was no way the world could be the way that I was told. I just felt it in my heart that it had to be different.
That's a wonderful thing that you just said. Our instinct, our intuition guides us. And on a personal note, I've had some very accurate reading from psychics over time.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, it was fun. It was fun. So I'm glad I did it. But
So here you are in Australia, and what was your next stop?
so I was studying there and whatnot, and I after my studies in Australia, I decided to take a few months off university to travel more. And, I just did that. And I still wasn't staying with Indigenous communities at the time. This is before I decided that I wanted to do that. So, I travel around some more, and I go back to Canada, go back to school. 3 weeks in, I was like, this isn't cutting it for me. I need to do something else. Like, I was like, okay, I tried the schooling. People wanted me to do that, so I tried it. But it wasn't what my heart wanted. As cheesy as that sounds, it just isn't what I wanted.
But if your heart doesn't motivate you, you will not be happy. There's no
For
question. And what's wonderful about it is there are many college students that don't get to feel the way you feel. I know that for myself, being in college, that I didn't have my heart in anything. And more importantly, I didn't really know where my heart was. So
mm,
it's amazing when you have your heart in something that you really know what you what you wanted to do and how you wanted to travel and all of those things. So when did the photography come into place? Everywhere you went, you took pictures. How did that evolve?
yeah, I actually want to add to what you just said about how a lot of college students don't really have that. I think that, you know, growing up, we kind of have it trained out of us. I think naturally we all gravitate towards the things that bring us the most joy. But when we grow up around people who just tell us like that's not how it is in the world, we lose that guidance. But in reality, I think that's what we're here for. I think we're here to follow our heart, but when we just listen to other people, we lose sight of it. So
All right. So what you're saying is that the generations before you have soured your generation, so to speak, to the idea that the world is more pure and innocent and beautiful
what I,
than
what I, what I'm
they're
saying is
leading us to believe.
well, what I'm saying is that I think naturally, people, we know like kids. Does a kid know what they enjoy doing? Right off the bat, you ask a kid, "Do you like this?" Yes. Do you like this? No. You ask an adult, it's always like, "I don't know," because for a lot of children growing up, it's like, "Oh, but you can't like this. No, no, no. Like you can't do that. Like that's not how it works in the world." So you grow up with that programming then, whereas before we were very like, I want to do this, or this will be great, or that will be great. And then it's just kind of like, no, real world, you have to do the whole 9 to 5 thing, which I'm not criticizing. It's necessary for a lot of people. I've done it. And yeah, I just think that we're told things aren't possible.
I understand. I interviewed an explorer the other day, and she said something similar to what you're saying. When we're young, we are less afraid. We say yes to more things than we say no to, correct?
Yeah,
And
definitely.
as we get older, our fears come into play and we say no more because, like you said, there's a big bad world out there and we have to be safe from it. And that's sometimes what parents do intrinsically. They intrinsically try to protect. And because of that, they put boundaries and limitations on our beliefs.
For sure. For
So
sure.
you're able to rise above that. So you knew that university wasn't exactly for you. Talk about that and your love of photography. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So, even before I decided that I wanted to, say, go visit indigenous communities, I had a camera with me, but I wasn't really, I didn't think much of it. Sometimes I would just use it to take pictures of anything I found interesting, but I wasn't very invested in it. And then when I decided that I wanted to go stay with indigenous communities, I was like, okay, I need a good camera, and because I have to document this. I can't visit these places and not have a way to document it. So I got a camera, and I've never taken a photography lesson, nothing like that. And I packed up my bags into I just had one 40-liter backpack. That's packed my life into it, sold everything else that I owned. And my first stop was Mongolia. And so I started in Mongolia and traveled throughout Central Asia with my camera. And my camera just, became a part of me. And
It was an extension of you and an extension of your heart. So here you are, what, 22 years old by then?
I was 21.
21 years old. You sold everything, absolutely everything, put
Like,
your entire life in a backpack. And what did your folks say to this?
oh my gosh. They
Let's hear it. What did they
so
say?
yeah. So they weren't happy, to sum it up. They were really scared, and rightfully so. I get it. They never, they were never exposed to something like that before. No one in their family traveled. It wasn't a normal thing. It's like now their young girl wants to just go basically stay with strangers, and they're just kind of like, what is she talking about? Like, she's crazy. And I just knew I had to do it, so I did it. And it was never to prove anything to anybody. It was simply because I wanted to do it, and I knew that if I didn't, I would just be really unhappy.
Sometimes you have to break away from what everybody else is telling you to do and listen to your heart. Despite everybody telling you this is crazy, despite everybody telling you they don't want you to do it, you've got a lot of dissension around you. Everybody was saying, please don't. I'm sure it was a lot of pressure on you to stay where you were.
It's it's really hard because you're turning your back on people who have made so many sacrifices for you. So it was difficult for me to do, but I just knew that I couldn't live a life where I was unhappy. That wasn't an option for me. My happiness, in the least selfish way possible, or the most selfish way you could say, it just had to come first.
I
And
understand. And that has nothing to do with how you feel about your family.
no, it doesn't. It
And
really doesn't. But to them, of course, it would seem differently. It's like, you don't care, you have to think about this more. But I knew that this is something that I knew. I knew that it would be really hard for them at first, but once they saw the results of it, I knew that they'd be happy. And that, it took a couple years. Now They totally get it. They're a lot more supportive. It just took a little breaking the ice, you could say.
Yes, and people do learn sometimes through other people's experiences. You've come out unscathed. You've had beautiful experiences. Were there any times ever in your travels that you turned around and said, maybe I shouldn't be doing this?
No, there wasn't. I think there were times where I pushed myself too far in the sense where I didn't give myself much rest time, which I think is really important. I'll actually tell you a story about this. I was staying with the Tatan tribe in northern Mongolia. And this region is split in two regions. You have, in one region, they're nomadic, and in the other region, they are sedentary. So I was in the region where they were nomadic, and to give you an idea of who the Tatan are, they're reindeer herders. So each family has about 30 reindeer. So, and every week we would change locations. We would sleep in teepees, we'd pack up the teepees or whatever, and we would change locations throughout the mountains. And that's how they live. There's no running water. Everything is, it's the river. That's how it is there. So I was with them one night. I stayed with them for a few weeks actually, but one night I woke up vomiting. I was really, really sick. I don't know what happened, but I was just losing a lot of fluids and I couldn't keep anything down and I got really ill. And this is in the mountains. It's freezing cold. It wasn't even winter yet, but just to give you an idea of how cold it was, the rivers were always frozen. Like we had to go to get water, you had to go break the ice and boil it. And that's how you got water. So I got really sick and I needed a doctor, and what could I do? So they offered me two remedies. It was either some plant medicine or reindeer milk. So I chose the plant medicine. So one of the elders, his name was Duji, he went into the forest in the middle of the night, picked some plants for me, and he brought it back and he made a tea out of it for me. And I tried drinking it, but again, I couldn't keep anything down. And it just became apparent I needed to go to the hospital, and the nearest village was 6 hours away by reindeer. So we waited until the first crack of dawn, and I got onto a reindeer. And the next thing I know, this animal is running for 6 hours down a mountain, and I'm just, vomiting off the side of it. And, every time you look down, there's wolf tracks in the snow. Like we were, there's no one else here. You're in the wild. There's wolf tracks in the snow, and, you're bouncing up and down, your body's going numb. It's freezing cold. So I eventually get to the village, and the first thing I do is I was like, I need to get some fluids in me. I was really dehydrated, really ill. So I walk into one of the little stores, and the first thing I see is this clock with a photo of the boxer Mike Tyson on it. I have no idea how this ended up there. No idea. And I just thought, man, I would love to feel like him right now. He's there with his gloves and he's full of energy, and here I am just really ill. And, I get some water, and then we go to the hospital, which really turns out to be a shed. So, but they had everything I needed. They hooked me up and whatnot. And this is where my mistake was, though. I was telling you that I pushed myself too far. The next day I went back. I didn't give myself time to rest. I didn't do any of that. And this was a 3-month trip. So I went from Mongolia to Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan. And in that 3 months, similar events happened to me about 4 to 5 times where I got really sick and I didn't give myself any rest time. So
there were some really serious experiences for you. On top of which, I don't know anybody that has ever ridden a reindeer. That's amazing.
well, now you do.
It's unbelievable. So what did you learn going forward? Will you be giving yourself more time now to rest? I mean, what did you learn from that experience?
It's, push for more, but not so much that you exhaust yourself.
Yes,
Um,
not so much that you sacrifice yourself. That's
for sure,
correct.
for sure.
That's the most
And
important thing.
it really is. And maybe you can relate. I'm sure, I think all women, we've had times in our life where, we've pushed ourselves too far. Maybe you've had a similar experience where in your life.
Many, many, many similar experiences. And I'm sure all of the mothers out there that take care of children, that put their children before their own health. Right. I
Mhm.
always tell everybody over and over again, if you're on an airplane flight, they tell you to put your oxygen mask on first before you deal with anybody else, because otherwise you're going to not be good. And people have to realize that taking care of yourself does not mean being selfish and uncaring of everybody else. It means that you can only be your best when you are your best mind, body, and spirit, and nothing
Mhm.
less than that. And that's how you give back to the world. So let's back this up again, because there are so many things that you said. And I'm sure our listeners are saying, oh my God, I can't believe these stories. And we love these stories. Tell me how, and tell our listeners how you began to have this passion for Indigenous communities. Where did that come from?
So I grew up on the west coast of Canada, and we have our First Nations on the west coast, and in in every part of the world, Indigenous people are just being ignored. They're having their rights denied, and when growing up in Canada, that became very apparent to me. And I was also surrounded by a lot of Indigenous art. You go to a lot of places and you see totem poles, and I always just felt very drawn to, I think, the authenticity that I felt came with Indigenous cultures. And I would see how people were being so ignored. And I'm a strong believer, Ellen, that the only way we move forward is together. So when we have people being ignored, you don't move forward, you move backwards. So that's really how it started. I noticed it, and then I got an interest in anthropology, and I thought that I needed to um, document it. And most importantly, I don't want to tell anyone's story for them, but with them.
So here you are moving among the tribes and moving through your life. But sometimes we want to know some basic things. Like you said, you got off the plane in Mongolia. How did you know where to go? And how did you know they would accept you?
That's
And
a
did
good
some
question.
tribes not accept you? I mean, how did you make that happen? You said you lived with some of the Mongolian tribes for 3 weeks. How does that even happen? Explain.
Yeah. So visiting, a lot of it really depends on where you go. And a lot of places, visiting certain tribal communities is not uncommon. A lot of people will visit certain communities, but I didn't really go through a group or anyone. I did it on my own, and the way I was able to do that was all of so I stayed with over 100 different families in tribal and nomadic communities. And honestly, the way that all of them have happened was that I would literally walk into a cafe in like a village or somewhere that there weren't any tourists. And I would just sit there minding my own business, knowing that if they saw me, almost 100% of the time, someone would come up to me and just be like, "Hey, what are you doing here?" Right? Because people in the West don't do that, but in other places they do. They're just really curious about who you are, and they're just some of the most hospitable people that you will meet. I think that in the West, we really have a lot to learn from countries, especially in the East. They're very hospitable people. And so, how I found this tribe was, I would go into different cafes and I would just ask people. I would show a picture and I'd be like, "Do you know where I can find this group of people?" And of course, online it'll tell you the regions they're in, but I need someone who can help me. So basically, how it always happens is someone will refer me to their friends, whose cousin, whose friend's friend's friend. know someone that can help me. And so I found someone who was able to speak English, and she came with me to help me translate. And, from one connection to another, I found someone who had connections with this tribe, and they're like, hey, can she come stay with you? In a heartbeat, the answer was yes. And something I always like to do is I always like to take something. I never like to go empty-handed. So because a lot of these communities live far away from villages and cities, it's hard for them to get certain things like, say, rice or flour. So, I would always buy the things that, was difficult for them to access, and I would take it up with me just as like a nice gesture. So does that answer your question, or do you need more details?
Yes, no. And it's quite surprising. And it actually goes back with your theme that people are more welcoming that we give them credit for.
100%. Especially, I actually want to tell you another story. It goes back to my first solo trip. So we know that my first solo trip was in Japan. And I was looking for my guest house. And so Tokyo is a city that, in my opinion, is really easy to get lost in, but it could have also been because it was my first trip. So I was looking for this guest house, and I'm walking around this part of town with my backpack on that was 3 times the size of me, because when you're on your first trip, what do? You pack everything that you have, right? Because the more you travel, the less stuff you take. But on my first solo trip, I took everything. And I was looking for this guest house, but couldn't find it. And so I started asking people where I could find it, and they couldn't speak English. And I was left empty-handed. And then this woman, she noticed me, and she was on her bike, and she was like, "Can I help you?" She spoke English. And I was like, "Oh, I'm looking for this guest house. Where can I find it?" And then, she biked around a little bit, came back, and she's like, "Sorry, can't find it." And I was like, "No problem." And so, I went on. And so for about 2 hours, I was walking around with my giant backpack, and I still could not find this guest house. And then 2 hours later, I see the woman on the bike again. She comes up to me. She had spent 2 hours, Ellen, biking around the area to find the guest house for me. And then she came back to find me so she could take me there.
Unbelievable.
And that level of, I was always a kind person, but that gesture, that level of kindness that she showed me opened a door for me, you could say. It kind of rewired the way I think of kindness now. And I can honestly say that first experience that I had with someone in a foreign country doing something really, really nice for me completely changed the way I treat other people. And it was so easy for her. It wasn't, someone in the West would never do that. I would, yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there, of course, there probably is someone out there who would, but it's not as common. And I've had people do things like that for me a million times over. And yeah.
Well, I think that's a wonderful thing. And I'm hoping that you not only have documented it with your pictures, but I'm hoping that you kept a journal.
Yeah, so
a journal of your stuff and your experiences.
Yes, but I would get lazy at times. But even if I don't have my journal, I have my camera. And a picture is worth 1,000 words. So my camera is my journal in a lot of ways. But now I have like a story journal where I do jot down my memories. But another girl, when I was in Kyrgyzstan, she offered to just travel across the entire country with me so she could help me translate. She didn't ask for anything. She was just like, "Oh, I'll do this for you." Just like that, in a heartbeat.
And did you take her up on her offer?
Oh yeah, we traveled together. We had a great time. She helped me communicate with people, and as a result, I was able to take a lot of great pictures. And I've been able to do things like that for people, right? People did that for me, and I became someone who would do that for another person. So I think that's one of the most valuable things.
And it's true what they say, paying it forward is a really significant thing, right? Receive kindness, give kindness away, right?
Yeah, I mean, is there a time in your life that you can recall someone doing that for you?
I can recall a myriad of kindness throughout my life, and people that have given me opportunities that I never thought I would get in my lifetime, with different career opportunities that led me in a completely different path. People that came out of the woodwork to provide me with information of things that were missing pieces in my life. Family members that bestowed unbelievable acts of kindness on me. The way I try to give back when I talk to each and every woman with Women Who Push for More, to give everybody like yourselves a platform and to let the world know how fabulous women like you are and how vital they are in the world, because you're a positive influence on life, and really explain to people that the whole idea of fear and boundaries is something that we're taught that is not supposed to be taught. We're supposed to
Yeah.
be more open and willing. So many ways, which is why this show in itself is my giving back, giving women like yourselves a platform, which really gives me a lot of joy and happiness. And I get to really meet and begin to know some amazing women. So certainly it's been an amazing adventure.
Um,
So let's continue on here a little bit. You've gone through all of this, and you've gone through various tribes. Are there, give us maybe some more impressions or some more stories about things that stood out for you in the past couple of years, some amazing experiences.
yeah. So a particular experience, or um, or could I talk about, say, a certain realization about the world we live in?
Please
I mean,
do.
yeah, so I backpacked across Iran, right? Which we know in the media is portrayed as very differently than most countries, let's say. There's a lot of negative, I think, perspectives towards countries in the Middle East. And I, as a solo female, traveled, backpacked across the entire country completely on my own. And there's one region in the country called Baluchistan. And Baluchistan is split between Pakistan and Iran. It's a region that's split between the two. And the same way a lot of people in the West are afraid of Iran, just to give you an idea, people in Iran are afraid of this region. So it's somewhere that a lot of people, even in the country, don't like to go to. It's considered.
Did you know that when you went?
I did know that because I
Okay.
myself am Iranian, but I had never been to the country before. Growing up, I was in Canada, and I was 22. My first time in the country was when I was 22. And I, as I was saying, I always wanted to go here because I had researched it and it looked really beautiful. But even when I went on the Canadian government's website, there was actually a warning message where it said, don't travel here. There's terrorist activity, shootings, all that stuff. And, I think, look, do your research. I don't ever want to encourage somebody to just go somewhere blindly. I think that that's naive as well. That's also ignorant. You should always do your research. But, when we look at the media, they're not going to tell us about, the 3 girls who went to Barcelona and had a great time. They're always going to tell you about the people who had a really bad time. And so, I would read what the media said about this region. And I thought to myself, I did some more poking around, and I saw that I don't think it's like that, because it didn't seem like it would. And when you compare, say, shootings in the US to, say, this region, it's incomparable. It's almost nothing. And so I knew that there was a glitch, you could say, in the way that this region was being portrayed. And I went there. My parents were very unhappy. And I was there for a month, backpacked around the entire region. I was housed, I was fed, I was welcomed into people's homes. I was never in the least amount of danger. Never. And I was shown love, I was shown kindness, and I just discovered how upset these people were about the way they were being portrayed. Now, do journalists document real issues? Of course. Of course. But for people in the West, we almost, as soon as it comes to a country in the Middle East, it's like we forget about what happens in our own countries. And then we just make them the bad guy. We make them dangerous. We put warning signs without realizing, the stuff that happens here. So I traveled around Baluchistan, and I highly, highly recommend, if I had a daughter, I would tell her, yeah, you can go there on your own. I would honestly be more concerned about my daughter traveling around the US by herself than I would in, Iranian Baluchistan. I can honestly say that.
Well, it's really important for us to hear firsthand how you feel, especially being a 24-year-old and being on your own and being a woman in a Muslim country, because what we hear is exactly what you said. That's what we hear. And I can tell you quite honestly, over the years and over time, as long as I'm living, I can remember so many people that came to visit New York City, because I'm a born and raised New Yorker, that came to visit New York City, and their parents told them, you have to be very careful in New York City. You have to keep everything under wraps. It's a big crime city. You have to be very, very careful. You can't go out past 8 o'clock at night. You have to carry everything in front of you. You have to hide everything. You should never go on the subways. I've lived through that, being a born and raised New Yorker, living in New York and looking around and saying, what are you talking about? It doesn't mean that we go out into the world with wild abandon. We do not do that. We have to have our intuition, and we have to be instinctive, and we have to sense if there's going to be danger. We don't deliberately put ourselves into situations that could be harmful. And we know what those are.
100%. And if someone is scared of something, I never encourage them to, if you don't feel comfortable, don't do it. Never ever put yourself in a position where you are forcing yourself to go somewhere because of what I say or because of what you hear anyone else say. If you do not feel comfortable doing something, please don't do it. Yeah, and something I wanted to add was, but what I do believe though, is that what happens when you're scared of a dog? It knows. If you're scared of a dog, that's when it bites you, right? I've had a similar experience or if you're around, where you're around an animal and it can sense that you're scared of it. Now, people are the same way. And I think that our fear of something is an invite. So as a young female who's traveled on her own really extensively, hitchhiking across, remote regions and whatnot, I was in a place where a lot of times I was the only woman, or I would be crammed in the car with like 8 grown men. I'm by myself, I'm, vulnerable, but I didn't feel vulnerable. I trusted myself. I put a lot of trust in, the universe, and I felt safe internally. And I feel like that mirrored, that was mirrored on my external world. I really believe that.
Most definitely. We are what we project. And if you really wholeheartedly believe it, you certainly have the confidence to move forward. But I know a lot of parents out there would be asking, do you know how to protect yourself? Did you take any courses or anything? What would happen if you were in a situation? And have you ever been in a situation where you had to run for your life? Tell us about that.
So when I first started traveling, I used to travel with like a little bottle of pepper spray. But I was really scared at that time. And, eventually, in an airport, they confiscated it from me, and I was empty-handed. I didn't have a pocket knife. I didn't travel with anything. And I only, in response to your question, no, I didn't have anything to, protect me. It was just me and my intuition. And I, yeah, I've never been in any situation where anyone tried to harm me. Of course, as a woman who's by herself, I had a lot of people who, would approach me or would follow me, but never with the intention of hurting me. It was more curiosity. And when I would see someone doing that, I'm very good at saying no. I actually go up to someone. If someone is following me, I don't, I don't pretend that I don't see it. I either go into a public space where, I lose them, or I just go up to them and I'm like, hey, you have to leave me alone. But I'm not scared. I feel very safe and comfortable in my skin and to be out in this world, because I know if I am scared of someone, I invite them in, but I'm not scared of them. So they can't come near me. I really feel that way. And, some people might feel like that's very ignorant to say, but so far for me, it's proven to be very effective.
That's wonderful. You have to have a sense about you that everything is going to be okay. And yet also, like you said, intuition to know if there is things around you that could be potentially unpleasant and to face it head on.
Yeah, I mean, look, you're not, so in certain places, yeah, of course, you don't go out by yourself in the middle of the night. Common sense, there are some places where you just can't do that. And, it's how it is. It's, you just have to roll with that. But no one just, no one's out there waiting to get you. I think, um, yeah, I think most people they just want to extend, their kindness to you. And when you really trust that, you'll begin to see it.
I understand. So, right now, you are not traveling among indigenous communities. Right now, you are in Germany someplace.
Yeah, so I was supposed to start photography school. It's in New York, and it's a really cool 1-year program. But as a result of the lockdown, I'm doing it online right now. So I'm working on that right now. And, I just started a podcast where, I'm sharing more of the stories that I've shared with you. But yeah, that's really what I'm doing right now. Life kind of stopped as a result of, well, I don't think life stopped. Travel stopped. And, until things settle, I definitely would not want to visit a community and put them at risk, right?
Of
So,
course. Of course.
so
So, you stopped traveling, what, March of this past year, March or April?
So before before March, I actually had stopped traveling for a few months, and I came back to Canada. And then I decided to start photography school, and I was getting ready to move to New York. And then lockdown happened, and I had to change a few things around. And then I was like, oh, I have some family and friends here, so I came back to Germany for a bit, and I'm just doing school online.
Okay, so you'll be here for a while. So I want to ask you some other things before we talk about your collaborations because you've done some really impressive things. What a lot of people are probably asking themselves is how are you financing your expeditions?
Yeah, definitely. So since I was, young, you could say, since I could work, I started working. I would save up money, and anyone who knows me knows that I don't go shopping. Not because I don't have the money for it, but because it's just the money that I would receive, I would save it for things like travel. And I saved for a really long time. And then in between, I would work some more, make more money. I had my photography, I was doing small things with that. And then a couple of my collaborations were actually sponsored. So that also helps where, I just did a project, for example, in South America. And, things like that started happening where financially it just, started to, it's just started to work that
Started
way.
to roll. Yeah. So what you're saying is in all your travels and the things that you were doing, people started to notice you and what you did.
I went after it. Like, I want to
Okay.
make it clear, like, I went into spaces where I knew they would notice me. I have dedicated so much of my time and energy in being in the right place at the right time. I didn't spend my early 20s the way most people do, which I don't think there's anything wrong with it, but I didn't spend it partying or going to staying in one place. I was actively meeting people, and sending my work in, and that's how doors started opening for me.
So when you decided to respond to my request for an interview, what attracted you the most about what I had said and how you could relate to it?
I like the same thing that you said, Ellen. I think there are stories people need to hear, because and the only reason I want anyone to hear my story is really so they can feel free to explore their own interests. I think, to me, a mediocre life isn't necessarily the 9 to 5 life. It's living a life that is less than what you want because you don't believe more is possible. And there's that, to me, is something that, I think it's an old paradigm, and I think we need to start shifting out of it. Um, so there's a lot of, I mean, most of the people I grew up around were people who were unhappy with their life because they didn't believe more was possible. And I refuse to let that be my life.
Wonderful. So, in every essence, then you would be what I consider a pushy broad, a powerful, unafraid, self aware, hardworking, young at heart, absolutely fabulous female. So, you can associate with that, I think. Yes?
For sure. And yeah, definitely. I do. I really do.
And certainly a woman who pushes for more in every aspect, even putting yourself out there so the right people would notice you and the right people would collaborate with you. And you have some very impressive collaborators, and you have also been appeared in some very impressive publications. So tell us about that.
Yeah. So I think that a there was a contest that I entered, some contests, and out of one of the contests I entered was for UNESCO, which is part of the United Nations. And it sent my actually, this is what happened. They announced that they were having a photo contest, and I didn't apply for it. I didn't apply for it because I was like, no, like, I'll just leave it. And then they extended the deadline, and I saw another like it popped on. I was just scrolling through my phone and it came up again. And I was like, okay, if they extended the deadline, I'll just do it. And I sent in my work, and my work got selected to be published and exhibited, which I thought was really cool. And then I found out later that they had over 6,500 submissions. They got over 6,500 submissions. Yeah, and mine was one of, I think, 60 to be chosen, and I thought that was really cool. And that, that connected me with some people, opened more doors for me, and gave me references to other places, and that's kind of how it happened. And there's another foundation, the Jimmy Nelson Foundation. They're a great foundation that also work to raise awareness about different communities. And I recently did a project with them in Peru. And yeah, it's just you put yourself out there, you reach out, and you hope you'll get more no's than yeses. You will get more no's than yeses. And I'm still really early in my journey. I'm still completely figuring this out. I have no idea what I'm doing most of the time, but I'm just going with it and hoping for the best. So yeah.
I am convinced that because of your very positive attitude and the ray of sunshine that you project and the innocence and the purity with which you approach life, that the opportunities will just begin to reveal themselves for you.
Thank you, Ellen. Thank
I
you.
really do. I believe so. So I want you to talk to us a little bit about some of the experiences you've had in terms of growth. Personal self-development and growth, and you talk about not missing opportunities and knowing that life is can be more purposeful than you think. But what kind of messages do you want to impart to women your own age?
I think, back to what I said about knowing that more is possible for you. I think I see my mantra in my life is freedom. Like my mantra is freedom. I see my intention is to embody my freedom and in hopes that it will inspire others to be free as well. So to anyone my age, I would say if you're happy doing what you're doing, then you're free. I think that's what freedom is. I think it's being on the path to the things that you want. Um, that's I know that sounds really simple, but I think that's just a simple way of saying so much.
Yes, and also understanding truly what freedom means to you as an individual.
Yeah, 100%.
Yes.
100%. What does freedom
So,
mean to you?
well, what freedom means to me is being able to be a pushy broad without the whole world thinking that's a negative connotation.
Mhm.
And I do things, and people do things for different reasons, but I do things, my why, so to speak, is to educate, empower, and inspire hope in people so that they realize they're not stuck and that change is possible. So
Mhm.
I think freedom means being comfortable in change,
Mhm.
right?
I
Just
love
kind of
that.
going with the flow, being comfortable in change, and allowing everybody to be who they want to be, right? With a sense of purity and goodness. And as I said to you before, just the ability to walk in the light
For sure. For
and
sure.
give that back. So what's on the horizon for you when COVID is lifted and things are better, or even right now in lockdown? You said you are taking a photography course, so that's wonderful. You're expanding your mind and expanding your skill, which is marvelous. What are the next steps? Outline them for us.
Yeah, I'm also working on some personal projects, which I can't actually say what they are yet.
Okay.
But they're going to take place in some other countries, and they're going to involve tribal communities. Um, I actually recently started working with another organization that is using um, that they teach filmmaking to people in tribal communities so that they can use it to document injustice and use that in court cases. So things like deforestation, and they're called People's Planet Project. They're a new organization from, I believe they're based in Amsterdam, and they're doing some really great stuff. So I'm really excited to start working with them. Um, as for my personal projects go, I'm, it's, the whole lockdown thing. I'm working on the technical aspects of them right now. But as for being able to travel and start, documenting, I have to wait it out and see what happens. So that's kind of and I started my podcast, which I already mentioned. So
Yes, tell us what's the name of the podcast?
it's called Around the World. Around the World. If it's easier, if you just type in my name, Tanin Kayvan, it'll come up for sure. It's on Apple and Spotify right now. So
And tell us what you do on that podcast.
yeah, so I talk about some of our patterns in humanity. I also talk about my travels. I talk about, how we can make the world a better place and mindfulness. So it's a little bit of, everything that we're talking about now. And then yeah.
No, that's marvelous. That's really good. And I will be putting all of this up on YouTube. Have you ever thought of actually shooting some videos in your travels, or will you just be sticking to photography?
I'm really interested in video, and that's definitely something I want to get into. So I haven't done it before, but I will definitely look into starting that. Also, in the course I'm taking, we have the option of learning some video. So I'm definitely interested in doing that. So
That's marvelous. And like we said, we will put up all of your social media contacts so people will know where to find you and where to listen and where to follow you, which is fantastic. You said something before which just intrigued me. You said, and this is, from a sociological point of view, that it seems to you that across the world there are certain human patterns that you speak about. What kinds
yeah.
of things are you talking about?
Yeah, so I recently uploaded a podcast where I talked about why the world keeps dealing with the same problems over and over again. Why we prolong taking action towards solutions, and why change is so hard. So, my based off my, you know, observations, you could say, I've noticed that, you know, at a large scale, we see this pattern everywhere, and I'll tell you what it is. I think so. Let's consider someone who smokes, right? When we've all heard a story that goes kind of like this. Someone is addicted to smoking. They want to quit, but they can't. They feel stuck in their pattern. And, this is obviously no judgment to anyone who smokes. But, we've all heard the story where someone is addicted to smoking. They want to quit, but they feel stuck in their pattern. Anytime they try to quit, they just end up reaching for another cigarette. And then one day they go to the doctor and they get diagnosed with cancer, and then they quit smoking. Another example is you're driving in your car, you're cruising on autopilot, and then all of a sudden a deer jumps in front of your headlights and you're forced to stomp on the brakes. So when something presents immediate consequences, it causes us to snap out of our pattern. It causes us to snap out of autopilot. And I think this is a reason why, on a global scale, we responded so quickly to this pandemic, but not issues like climate change, because the effects of climate change feel progressive. They don't feel immediate enough to some people. And this is a pattern, that we all have to some degree in our life. And we see it among, our politicians. We see it, in our daily life. What are you procrastinating? What are you waiting to do until, you wait until the last minute to do it, because then it's like, oh, you have to do it. Someone, quits smoking once they get cancer. But what I also talk about is, right, not everyone is going to say quit smoking after a diagnosis, right? So what do those people do? They do what we see a lot of people in our politics doing, for example. And not just our politics, but when people are unable to observe their patterns, their destructive habits, and take a new course of action, they go into deeper states of denial, and it comes out as hurting other people, hurting themselves. So that's why good leaders are people who don't need the same thing to happen over and over again before they decide there needs to be a change. So that's a little bit of what I talk about in the first episode.
That's amazing. And I know that you have found this over time intrinsically by studying people that are learning a little bit faster and evolving a little bit faster and not giving in. And I would tend to think that maybe there are certain peoples or certain groups that don't seem to lend itself to have the propensity for an addiction in a certain way, because that's what you're describing. When somebody does something over and over again, expecting different results, it's our true definition of insanity. And also that constant repetition of negativity or whatever, that constant repetition of something over and over again that needs to change is a compulsion in itself.
100%.
So what happens is the first thing that we can do, which is what you are saying, is to become aware. The therapeutic process gives us 4 things to look for. Number 1, to be aware of what's going on. Just like you said, aware that climate change is real, for instance. Let's take one of your examples. Climate change is real, and I don't have to wait until it is right at my doorstep to realize how real it is, right? Or smoking is bad for your health no matter what, and I don't have to wait until I get cancer to know that I need to stop smoking, correct?
Exactly.
And the second part of that is to verbalize it, just like you are, to go out to different people and to talk about it and to make that real. So it's awareness and verbalization. And the third step is to basically do something about it. Change does not happen without change. The
Yeah.
world does not change unless you are the change you would like to see the world be.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I think the the root cause of all our problems in the world is because humans, we have not learned how to transcend our pain. I think that is the root cause of every problem we have on the face of this planet.
Well,
So
explain that to me a little bit more
yeah,
from where you see it.
yeah, I think that like pain that isn't dealt with shows itself, like I said, as things like hurting people, hurting our environment. We become less compassionate, less empathetic. And I think that, you know, we, for example, adults who that we see hurting people were really just teenagers at one point that were once children who never learned how to deal with their emotions, right? So I often ask myself, how can I ask with, say, world leaders to sit with issues like, let's say, world hunger, when these people can't even sit with themselves? Because when we feel pain come up, what's the first thing we do? Your addiction could be a cigarette, or it could be your cell phone. You reach for your cell phone and you scroll mindlessly. Like, we all do this to some point to avoid how we feel, because when we feel our feelings, we're scared to do that because we're worried that we'll be engulfed by them. So we don't go near it.
You're
And I
right.
think I think the path to change is everyone creating that awareness and really sitting with their pain, meditating, finding a way to let that move through you. That's
Absolutely. It's processing through the pain, and that's very astute of you. It really is.
yeah.
So tell us a little bit in general about, you've been around the world and you have met some amazing people. In general, do you feel that this is a hopeful world? Are we moving in a hopeful direction? What's your general philosophy?
So I always like to use this example. I always like to say, if we could go back in time and speak with Neanderthals about the future we have today, and if we told them that one day we'd have a healthcare system, satellites launching into space, or even grocery stores, they wouldn't believe us. And the reason they wouldn't believe us is because at that time, there was no evidence that one day we would have these things. But despite there being no evidence of the future we have today, the seeds of today's world were still being planted. And I think we're always planting the seeds for a future that has yet to be realized. Now, we want to know that the future we're creating is going to be a good one, right? And I strongly also believe, and so where was I going with that? We want to know that the future we're creating is one that's going to be a good one. And I strongly believe that even though our world seems like it's in turmoil, that we're always progressing towards a better future. I think that I've developed a holistic perspective on how things work. And, it's the painful truth that you can't have the good without having the bad. It's, you can't. It's the way things work. And I hate it sometimes. I'm human. It bothers me sometimes, but it's true. The bad gives birth to a lot of solutions. And, we just all have to do our part to keep moving forward. Yeah,
Well, like they say, out of the ashes the phoenix rises, correct?
of course. And, another analogy I love using is that if we look at forest ecosystems, fires need to happen in order to, rejuvenate the soil for new vegetation to grow. Otherwise, so in a sense, I'm saying we have to burn, and
Yes.
then new
Well,
vegetation will grow.
yes. Well, let's hope that we've had enough of that
Yeah, We
in
really
on the
have.
West Coast of the United States. Yes,
Oh
let's
gosh,
hope we have, and in some other parts of the world.
it's
But
horrible.
what you're saying is, and I think your general message is that from the people that you have been around and the experiences you had, do you think that this is a hopeful and a joyful Earth?
I do. I really do. I think there's so much more good than bad in the world. And this isn't coming from a space of ignorance. This is coming from someone who, I come from a family of immigrants. I've worked with children who have lost their parents at war. I've, been to a young girl's wedding. She was only 14 years old. So I've seen a lot of things that I wish never existed. But I can tell you that the amount of good that I've seen in this world far outweighs the bad. And I also believe that what you look for is what you'll find. So whatever we focus on, we bring more of it to fruition. But based off my experience, I really believe that we do live in a hopeful world. And I'm so inspired by, so many people who are doing so many things to make the world a better place.
Well, with that, I just want to say thank you so much for a very inspiring hour. And I know that our listeners are going to get a great deal out of your experiences and follow you. And I wish you a tremendous amount of luck and success on your journey. Thank you so much for being here with me today.
I wish the same for you, Ellen. Thank you so much for having me.
This is Ellen Stewart, the Pushy Broad from the Bronx, saying thanks for listening. And remember, everybody needs a little push.
From the pushy broad from the Bronx, New